How's it going, you boring history buff? It's me! You can also call me your friendly, boring historian who brings you all the content. And today we are going to talk about how people survived in the Wild West. I've always been fascinated with the Wild West, and when I was younger, I would always watch these old westerns with my grandpa. So let's just get into it. Now, first off, this is a part of my new series called Boring History for Sleep. This is where I take topics that I know will be pretty interesting, but probably won't keep you up too long, because they are UN super shocking or anything like that. Instead, I hope they'll help you learn something new while also falling asleep. So in order to answer the question, we have to go back a little bit to understand the setting. First off, when we think of the Wild West, most of us picture cowboys herding cattle across the Great Plains. But the truth of the matter is that there were lots of different types of people living in the American frontier. From miners to farmers to merchants to Native Americans. It should also be said that the period commonly referred to as the Wild West was actually much longer than most people think. The traditional start is usually 1865 with the end of the Civil War, and the traditional end is usually around 1900. When the Wild Bunch Gang was finally stopped by authorities. So that's a time frame of around 35 years. Now, the United States is obviously a very big place, and so the Wild West wasn't a completely uniform experience. In fact, each region had its own unique challenges and opportunities. For example, life was very different in the deserts of Arizona than it was in the forests of the Pacific Northwest. But there were some commonalities. First off, if you were white, there was an abundance of work. As railroads pushed further west, more and more people headed out to make their fortunes. According to US Census data, the western population grew from around 218,000 in 1860 to over 7 million in 1900. That is a growth rate of over 200% in just 4 decades. And not all of them were men either. While women definitely made up a smaller portion of the population, there were still many families that moved out west together. Next, unlike what Hollywood would have you believe, the vast majority of people who moved west were not poor immigrants. In fact, according to census data, nearly half of all Western migrants were already worth at least $1,500, which in today's money would be over $45,000. The next thing you should know about life in the Wild West is that while the majority of people were enriched, the opportunity for wealth was definitely there. A skilled miner, for example, could easily make a few $100s a day, which was more than enough to live off of. In fact, some of the largest gold rushes in history happened during this time period, such as the California Gold Rush of 1849 and the Klondike Gold Rush of 1896. Now, all of this is not to say that life in the Wild West was easy. Far from it. There were many, many hardships that came along with trying to build a life in the frontier. Things like disease, poverty, and violence were rampant. In fact, the average life expectancy in the Wild West was only 35 years old. But perhaps the greatest challenge of all was simply boredom. Most people don't realize this, but the Wild West was mostly just really boring. Imagine sitting out on the prairie for weeks or even months at a time with nothing to do but herd cattle. Even if you weren't poor, you probably wouldn't have much to eat. And if you were poor, you definitely wouldn't have much to eat. And there was almost no entertainment. Imagine being 32 years old and having seen 31 years worth of sunsets that all look basically the same. Eventually, you're gonna get bored. Well, thankfully for those pioneers who got bored, there was always one option. Robbing. Now, obviously, this was not the preferred way to make money, but sometimes a guy's gotta do what a guy's gotta do. This was actually such a problem, the newspaper started running ads warning stagecoach passengers to bring more food, so that they didn't get so bored that they started robbing the coach. One ad in particular read, "A word of advice to passengers by a traveler who has just come from the East. Bring plenty of provisions and don't play euchre or dominoes after 6 o'clock in the evening, as the game leads to riot and robbery." Of course, sometimes people did have to resort to eating whatever they found lying around, which sometimes meant eating roadkill. Sometimes travelers would see a dead animal on the side of the road and they would stop and eat it. There was no refrigeration available. So, if they didn't eat it, it would simply spoil and be wasted. Of course, they couldn't just start eating any old dead animal they found on the road. If it was a dog or a cat, they simply couldn't eat it, no matter how hungry they were. But other animals were fair game. There was even a saying for when someone ate a dead animal that had been left out in the sun too long. He's been so long in the brothy wagon that he'll eat anything. In order to prevent things from getting too smelly, the pioneers developed a special technique for cooking roadkill. They would cut open the carcass and lay it on a spit over the fire and cover it with the entrails. Then they would wait until the entrails were cooked through, and only then would they eat the meat. Now, not everyone in the Wild West was willing to settle down and live an honest life. Some people, in fact, chose to become outlaws instead. And when you were an outlaw, there were certain things you just had to accept. First off, you had to accept that your life was probably going to be pretty short. Outlaws had a life expectancy of only 21 years old. That means that the average outlaw died younger than the average American Civil War widow. Only one outlaw in 5 would live past the age of 30. Another thing you had to accept as an outlaw was that everyone hated you. Life as an outlaw was extremely lonely. Your family and friends would disown you and society would shun you. But the biggest downside to being an outlaw was the food. You simply couldn't eat roadkill. Hasanodla! You had to purchase your food, which was expensive. Back then, a loaf of bread cost around $1, which is the equivalent of nearly $30 today. One of the most famous outlaws of the Wild West was Billy the Kid, who reportedly ate a pound of bacon every single day. If you were to buy that much bacon today, it would cost you over $60. Can you imagine being broke and having to pay $60 for a week's worth of food? It's simply unfathomable. Now, despite all these difficulties, there were still some benefits to being an outlaw. For one, there was a lot of money to be made. The best outlaws could earn upwards of $1,000 a week, which was the equivalent of nearly $30,000 in today's money. Not to mention you didn't have to work regular hours. In fact, you could pretty much work whenever you wanted. And there was also a great deal of freedom that came with being an outlaw. The government didn't have to follow the same rules as ordinary citizens. And they didn't have to pay taxes either. In the end, though, being an outlaw just wasn't worth it. You may have been able to make a lot of money, but you were also putting your life in danger every single day. And if you got caught, you're probably gonna end up dead. Thanks for watching. I hope you learned something new and maybe even fell asleep. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button because it really does help me out. And until next time, remember, history's boring, but it's also kinda cool.